On May 19, 1780, the sun went out. Not for long, but for an hour or more, the sun was completely dark, which obviously caused widespread panic. People thought the end of the world was nigh. They ran into the streets, they fell to their knees and they prayed. They saw the sky turn black as night and the sun turn into a fiery ball. Some people even went blind from looking directly at it. But how could this have happened? How did the sun go out? Well, later on, scientists would discover that it was due to a massive volcanic eruption in Indonesia which had spewed ash and gas into the atmosphere, blocking out the light. But at the time, no one knew that. All they knew was that the darkness was unnatural. It wasn't just that the sun was dark, it was that the air around them had become deathly still. There was no wind at all, and as night fell, the temperature dropped dramatically. It was as if someone had taken a blanket and wrapped it around the entire earth, muffling the sound of birds and even the rustling of leaves. Then just as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness lifted and the sun shone through once more. People emerged from their homes blinking into the sudden daylight. They had survived the night when the sun went out, and because this was such an unprecedented event, it was recorded in many historic documents of the time, and so we know about it today. In fact, it's one of the most famous weather events in US history, but it wasn't the first time this had happened. There were other instances in recorded history where the same thing occurred, where the sun went out for a few hours or even minutes. For example, there was the year without a summer in 1816. When a series of volcanic eruptions caused temperatures to plummet across the northern hemisphere and it seemed like the sun was simply taking a very long vacation. But I think the most famous instance of this was in 1963 when the world watched in suspense as the United States and the Soviet Union prepared to launch the first manned flight of Apollo. The astronauts were gonna fly to the moon. But on the day of the launch, the world was plunged into darkness. For a few minutes, the sun went out and people thought the worst. Had the Russians done something to the sun? Had they perhaps developed some kind of super weapon? It turned out that it was just a cloud. A simple cloud that had drifted in front of the face of the sun, just like a child holding a piece of paper in front of a flashlight. But for those few minutes, the world was plunged into darkness. And I can't help but wonder, what would you do if the sun went out? Would you run into the streets? Would you fall to your knees and pray? Or would you just stand there and stare in disbelief as the world around you is plunged into darkness? Let me know in the comments below.